Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Little Theater for this today's conversation about the film Bye Bye Tiberius. My name is Yasmina Tawil. I'm the Director of Film Programming at the Arab Film and Media Institute, and I'm so excited to be speaking today with Lina Suellem about her film Bye Bye Tiberius. Hi, Lina.
Hi, Yasmina.
It's great to be talking to you again about Bye Bye Tiberius. I know people probably have a lot of questions. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to say at the top before we get started.
I'm just very happy to be exchanging with you as you've been one of the first persons that I did Q&A with in the US back in January when we released the film in New York at DCTV and in Los Angeles. And so I'm very happy that we can continue our conversations and keep on exchanging together around the film.
Thank you. I am as well. To get started just at the very beginning, what was the genesis of this project? I mean, it's not the first time you've made a film about members of your family, but what made you want to tell your mother's story specifically?
For me, this film is really a continuation of my first film. I wouldn't have been able to do Bye Bye Tiberius if I hadn't done Their Algeria, which was about, and which is about because it still exists, which is about the story of my Algerian paternal grandparents who separate at 8 years old and who tell their story of exile through the film, as they had never told me their story of immigration from Algeria to France in the context of the French colonization of Algeria. And through their Algeria, I started exploring a story of transmission from generation to generation in a context of exile and displacement. So while I was touring with their Algeria in different festivals around the world, and in my the country where I live in France, I realized how much these intimate stories are really speaking to many people who have experiences of exile and uprooting. And it's not specific to people who are uprooted from a country to another, but sometimes it can happen in the same territory. And so it really gave me the strength to keep on exploring stories of exile and transmission. But this time in my maternal family, on the Palestinian side of my family, as I knew that also in this collective story of the Palestinian people, there was all these intimate stories that I had access to through my family. And specifically in my family, it's the women who have been able to maintain their history and their legacy alive through generations, despite dispossession and exile. And I really wanted to keep on capturing these memories and these stories before they fell into oblivion, because also I was filming generations that could disappear without passing on their stories. So I always had this vital need of capturing the stories, and I couldn't do this film if I hadn't gone through this experience with the first film and transmitted it to the audience and seeing how much we can transmit our collective story through our intimate stories.
Speaking of like the intimate stories, I wanted to ask, I mean, maybe it seems a little obvious as you gave that explanation, about your decision to include yourself in the story. Because sometimes, I mean, obviously it's your family, but sometimes documentary filmmakers don't want to include themselves. I just would love to know about that and any other sort of sim similar choices. Sorry.
For me, it's of course, at first, I don't want to include myself because there's a lot of shyness and fear of vulnerability. And I always thought and knew that for me, the focus was on the people that I was filming. In
Mhm.
this case, the women of my family, who are for me each a hero of her own story, and each of the stories are for me epic. So I really wanted to give them back their memory, their right to poetry, and to exist fully in their full complexities. But at the same time, I had to be true to what I was doing in the sense that I'm the one who is telling the story. I'm the one who is collecting the pieces of memory that are totally fragmented, because the specificity also of our family and all Palestinian families and of the Palestinian story is that our memory is completely dispersed. The families are completely fragmented. And there's a lot of ruptures in our story due to forced displacement. And so I am the one who is trying to build a puzzle with all these pieces. And so even if I am telling the stories of these women, I'm also part of this line of transmission. And if I go explore transmission, it's also to explore what is left and what has been transmitted to me of all that. But my place has been found really in the end of the process, meaning that I didn't write my voice over until the last phase of editing, the last 3 weeks after more than 5 years of writing and shooting and editing, because I had to give back to all of these women, all of the women of my family, their place in history, their memory, their place in a linear story that I was trying to create through the film, so that I could place myself in the story. And so, and at the same time, I'm the one who is interacting with them. Of course, my mother in the film is my guide who opens the door to all the other women of the family, but I'm the one who is asking her to do that. And I go through her to tell the story of the rest of the family. I come back to her to reflect on what I have discovered. So I'm the one that is, guiding all of that. And I think in documentary, it's really important to be authentic in the process on who you are to the people that you're filming, what is your place. And so I really wanted to be true and authentic and genuine about my position in the film, the position of the people I'm filming. I'm part of the family, I'm part of the line of transmission. I'm the daughter, I'm the granddaughter, but I'm also the director. So sometimes I'm more in a distanced position, and everything is kind of intermingling in the film.
Yeah, I think ultimately maybe it would have been odd if you had not been in the film at all, knowing, because people would know that you are the
Yeah.
daughter, granddaughter. Yeah, and it makes sense too as well. You are I think we talk a lot in documentary about the the lens with which stuff is viewed. Nothing is inherently objective. So, your presence also affects maybe some ways that the story's told, or what information comes through, and how we as audience interpret it.
Yeah, and it's a film about transmission. So me interacting with the people I'm filming is also transmission. It's reactivating transmission, it's continuing transmission. So it was more than natural to be in this process. I wasn't trying to film something out of the present of what I'm filming.
Yeah.
It was really through my subjectivity that I wanted to tell the stories of these women, because I am asking them to transmit to me, and I'm collecting their stories and rebuilding it through what they transmit to me or through what I received. So it was part of the process also to include myself in the way that I was writing, in the way that I was filming, in the way that I was asking the questions, entering or not in the frame, existing with my voice, with also never, moving away from the focus that it's a film about 4 generations of women, and I'm also part of these these 4 generations.
Yeah. I can imagine convincing your mother to do this may have not been the easiest task, since you were asking her to, talk about some things that were very personal, intimate, dig up some old wounds within the family and stuff like that. Um, I would love to know how you went about that, what her reaction was, and, as far as what made her ultimately say yes to opening up about this, and sharing it not just with you, but with the whole world.
So it wasn't easy for my mom at first, because as she's an actress in fiction, she's used to convey and transmit emotions through the stories of other characters, to lend her body to other emotions. And she's used to talk about herself through her work and through the characters that she plays. So
Mhm.
she's used to talk about herself to journalists and never really about her intimate process, and about her own choices.
Mhm.
So at first it was very hard because I felt like there was a front of protection that she was putting. We were not at ease. She wasn't used also to a camera, a direct camera, a documentary camera, and a frontal way of asking things. It was also hard for me because as a daughter, it was hard for me to ask questions to my mother about her womanhood or her teenage. So I also had to find my place to be able to exchange with her in a more equal way from woman to woman and not only from daughter to mother. So it took some time, but I think what was important is that we had a lot of conversations. We had a lot of moments that we were not at ease with the process, trying to understand why it was so difficult, what was blocking. And eventually, we both understood that we had to surpass this obstacle because the aim was to transmit stories that were beyond our relationship,
Mhm.
beyond our link to the family, beyond the woman of our family only, but as it was not only stories of transmission from woman to woman or mother to daughter, it was stories that were an echo to the stories of the Palestinians in general, of people that are deprived of their rights, of their identity, and that are constantly bound to reinvent themselves, that need to tell their story in order to survive. So we were both longing to complete that objective, and which this is what allowed us to, uh, put our fears away and not fear of being exposed in our vulnerability. And it allowed us to tell the story, thinking of also how we are immortalizing the stories of women that have never been able to tell their stories and that are part of a collective story, which is the Palestinian story that is silenced, that is denied, that is unwritten. And so we had this in mind, which allowed us to keep on doing it and not abandon because of our fear and of moments in which we were uneasy.
And you and I had spoken before too about the importance of telling women's stories, especially Arab women and Palestinian women's stories, because they're so often misrepresented in Western media. So I think on top of the importance of telling Palestinian stories in general, because of all the things you mentioned, the displacement, the loss of memories through people, through loss of archives and things like this. It's also very important to all of us Arab women to see ourselves truthfully reflected on screen, whether it be in documentary or in fiction work. So it's less of a
Yeah,
question and more of an
yeah, yeah.
appreciation and a thank you for doing
Thank
that.
you. No, but as you're saying, it's not only in Western media that Arab women are misrepresented, also in cinema, and even sometimes in Arab cinema, because um, we are also sometimes used to be perceived through the eyes of others, and sometimes we tend to represent ourselves in the way that others represent us. So it's also a struggle to, fight against the stigma and recreate our own language to represent ourselves in the complexity that we should be represented with.
Mhm.
It's as if we don't have the right to complexity because Arab women are always represented in a very binary way, either the very liberated, emancipated, that is cutting with all traditions and going to the Western world as if this was the synonymous of freedom, either a very conservative woman, religious, that would, continue a patriarchal system and
Mhm.
oppress other women around her. When most of the women that we know in our surrounding are a mix of many different things, that they can be attached to some traditions and values, and they can be attached to their religion while having their own aspirations and having a great sense of freedom and being able to make decisions for themselves, influence the world around them. And this complexity is what is denied to Arab women, as if, you know, we couldn't be complex and exist in this world as the rest of the rest of the people, you know, as if we had to go through these labels. And so I think it's important that we can tell our stories, give back to our stories and the characters that we create in fiction or the people that we film in reality, give them back their authenticity, their strength, their vulnerabilities, their contradictions, which also part of our humanity. And I think this is what I wanted to do with the film, by just simply portraying the women as I know them, as they are, in a way that they can recognize themselves. And by doing that, I was hoping that, of course, others can also recognize themselves, and to give strength also to be able to tell our stories through our own language and stop using the language of others and of the West also in the way that they represent us.
Yeah, and your family, like the women in your family alone, kind of they showcase a whole slew of different personalities and complexities, you know, religious conservatism and liberation, and they all chose very different paths and show this full, like the whole, almost like the full spectrum is there present within the women of your family, which is so interesting and special, especially as a document of Arab women. I would love to ask you about the archival media in the project. We do see old uh, videos and photographs, not just of your family, but of Palestine. I know this was a very long process to source all of these things. Could you tell us a little bit more about the archival media you used?
So when I started thinking about the film, I already had access to family archives, videos from the 90s that my father was filming while we were visiting my maternal family in Galilee and my mother's native village and many other places in Palestine. And so I had all these video materials in which I could see all the women of my family 30 years ago in the 90s, and I could see myself as a kid. And it's really thanks to these videos that I took conscious of the importance of the women in my family, which first of all were numerically more than men, and which seem to be the guardians of the temple of my memory, because all my memories of Palestine were transmitted by her and through by them and through them. And I was so lucky to have this in images, because by filming me with these women in these places, my father really allowed me to exist in this family, in this line of transmission, even if I was born abroad and if I didn't live with them. And so for me, this material was really precious, because also it was a proof of, you know, a lot of tradition, a lot of celebrations, a live Palestinian culture that we didn't really see on screen. And it really was important for me to start with these images, to think of how I would construct the film. Of course, by filming the women in the present, 30 years later, for them to be able to tell their story, but also coming back to a further past, so that I could also give back to the women part of their history that has been denied to them, and place them back in the places from which they've been evicted and displaced by force, such as Tiberias, from where my family was evicted in 1948. And so for that, I had to research historical archive, but it was very long and difficult as a process, because there is no National Palestinian Archives. The videos are dispersed in different funds in the Western world. I had to consult a lot of specialists in the Arab region, in Palestine, in Jordan, and also in Europe, in the US. And it took many, many years to find images, especially that I was trying to find in the historical archives faces of women.
Mhm.
And so it was really important for me to be able to tell the intimate stories of the women of my family while using historical archives and faces of many other women, also to link the intimate story to the collective story and allow the women of my family also to exist in these places that they have belonged to and that either they cannot access, either don't exist anymore, or in which their memory is not present, in which they have been where they have been erased. So it was a very long process, but it was very clear for me from the beginning that I wanted to use different sources of images, not as an aesthetic choice, but as a vital, necessary choice to tell a Palestinian story, because each image becomes a proof of our denied existence. And so each image that is found or that is filmed becomes a precious archive to tell our story, knowing that, the erasure of culture through the erasure of archive and cultural patrimony is ongoing in Palestine. So it was really something that I was conscious of since the beginning as a necessity to the narrative of the film. And it's not a taste, it's not like, oh, I love films with so many different sources of images, because it's very hard to edit and to construct, to go from the past to the present, to the past to the present, and different times. It was really challenging also to construct the film with these images, but it was necessary for me.
And you did such a beautiful job with it. It really, yeah, it really adds to the story, as you said, especially connecting the stories of the past that you don't have direct images of, to utilize these images of other women and girls to help tell your family's story. Um, and you create a way to preserve those archives too, on top of wherever you found them, because nothing is ever as permanent as we hope, no matter how many ways we archive and back things up, it seems. So you've created another very special resource within the film as well.
Okay.
Before we wrap this up, because we just have a few minutes left, I do want to ask on a lighter note, if in going through your family archives, if you uncovered anything special, any fun memories, anything, you or your family had forgotten about in those old photos and
Yeah.
videos.
I think what I discovered concretely are the poems that my mother was writing when she was a teenager, which really was moving, because it's as if by discovering these poems, I gained access to her imaginary as a child, which is very disturbing for a child to, meet your parents' inner child. It was really, really important for me and impactful also because I kind of understood something that I wasn't really conscious of. I always thought that my mother became the woman that she became after she left.
Mhm.
And I realized by discovering her poetry that she was always this girl and teenager and woman. And so it allowed me to understand how much the women of the family have allowed that and have transmitted to her this strength, this longing for elsewhere, this longing for art, even though they didn't have this path, and even though no one was really in the art world. But there is something of their story that is epic, that is a story of resistance, to the chaos around you, a story of strength, because these women have been able to continue surviving, living, celebrating life, transmitting their culture, and educating their children, and influencing the world around them, despite dispossession and chaos and displacement. And this strength and the fact that they have also been able, my grandmother, great grandmother, my great aunts, to realize some of their aspirations and dreams, even if it wasn't given at all, is maybe something that inspired my mother to long for something else. So that moved me so much, because by discovering these poems and trying to find what was transmitted from generation to generation. It kind of clicked. And also it kind of clicked in the sense that I felt that I was continuing something that my mother had started, because she started writing poems, and I discovered that she wrote a poem about her own grandmother, my great-grandmother. And I was at this time writing the film and writing texts about the women of my family, and discovering also in the process that my grandfather was writing love poems to my grandmother. So it's as if even this tradition of writing, of poetry, of existing through our imaginary, because the reality is so suffocating and doesn't allow didn't allow them to exist in their full identity as Palestinians, as women. And so they kind of used also poetry to exist in an imaginary territory. And so it allowed me to understand also that what I was trying to do with the film is to create an imaginary territory in which I could allow each of the women, all of them, all of us, to exist together, even if in reality the family had been fragmented and marked by separation and rupture and exile. And so I wanted to allow us to have this linear story, even though in the reality it wasn't linear.
Mhm.
And in reality, we couldn't live all together in the same place.
Mhm.
And so through the film, it's a way also to allow us to exist in our full imagination, and allow us also the right to keep on dreaming, because it's the only way of continuing to exist outside of the reality that is, also depriving you of your identity and your truth.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing this film with us, for sharing your story and your family's story with all of us, and creating this beautiful legacy, this beautiful archive, and this beautiful film and story and piece of art. It's been great to talk to you again, Lina. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for all of those that have watched the film also.